We did a show a few years back on the Fringe, and of all the stories we told, there was a couple I knew were coming specially from Bowness to see it. So I told this joke, which unfortunately they actually didn't come to that performance. So I was looking for them as I was telling it. You know, I couldn't see them, and blow me, they come up at the evening performance, and so I told it again. But just in case, there are everybody here from Bowness. Everybody here from Bowness? Great. You know that Billy Wolfe once told me that the SNP stood for two things: independence for Scotland and home rule for Bowness. But the story I was about to tell was, it's actually about a game show called Take Your Pick. The Take Your Pick was the biggest game show for the younger folk in the audience. It was a game show even before game shows. It was one of the first ever game shows on television. And it was hosted not by Des O'Connor, so the kind of middle-aged will remember Des O'Connor doing it, but even before that, at the dawn of time, a guy called Michael Miles hosted Take Your Pick. And Michael Miles was a statuesque New Zealander with a pucker accent. He used to do wartime broadcasts way back, and had this imperial English accent, and my granny in Livgay thought he was great. So much classier than Huey Green. She loved Michael Miles. And the reason that I'm telling this story will become evident as it goes on, but my granny loved Michael Miles, and I tolerated it because she'd be kind of babysitting me on a Friday night when Take Your Pick was on. But it was quite interesting. One night it was really interesting. For the guy who won Take Your Pick that night was from Bowness. And this, because I knew where Bowness was, this is way back in the early 60s. And suddenly the game show became really appealing to me. As this guy got through the rounds, and eventually he won the show, so it was his job to open the box or take the money. Because the winner of the show got to open the box, in which case you'd get the star prize, usually a mini, but sometimes a yacht, or alternatively they get the booby prize, which is usually a carrot or another vegetable, or a Tory MP, whatever was available. So, the boy from Bowness won the show, and it was up to Michael Miles to try and bribe him to take the money and not open the box, right? So Michael Miles says to the boy from Bowness, £100. I shall give you £100 not to open the box. And the boy from Bowness says, you know, Mr. Miles, it's a great honour for me to win your show. A great honour. I've told everybody in Bowness that I've promised them all, you know, if I was to win your show, your great show, Mr. Miles, I'm definitely going for the star prize. I want to sell that yacht out of Bowness Harbour down towards the Fourth Brig. So I'm not taking your money, I'm opening the box. Michael Miles says, £200. Boy from Bowness says, £200. Nah, no, I promised my wife before I came out. I said to her, darling, I'm opening that box. I'm going for the star prize. We're getting the mini or the yacht or the foreign holiday. I promise you. So can I take your money? Michael Miles says, £500. The £500 in the early 60s was the average wage. Might be again the way the Tories are going. The £500 was the average wage, and Michael Miles says, £500. Boy from Bowness says, you know, that's an amazing amount of money, Mr. Miles, a huge amount of money, but I actually said to my widowed mother, before I came out today, I said to my widowed mother, no matter what Mr. Miles says to me, if I'm lucky enough to win your great show, Mr. Miles, whatever you say to me, I'm opening the box, I'm going for the star prize. But you could offer me £1,000 and I would still open the box. Michael Miles says, £1,000. The boy from Bowness says, I'll take the money. Right. The reason I tell the story is this. My granny loved Take Your Pick so much that she was furious when they interrupted it one night to tell us of the death of John F. Kennedy on a Friday night in the middle of Take Your Pick. Assassinated in Dallas. That's how passionate she was about it. She thought it was important for the world and real interesting, but nonetheless it didn't justify interrupting Mr. Miles and Take Your Pick. And the lesson for us all is this, and it's a lesson about the wee Alba book. You see, certain things happen in the world, like the assassination of presidents, that impinge on us, whether we want them to or not. So what's happened since 2014, since I sat David Cameron staring at a picture of Scotland with all the yellow marked constituencies? So you had to sit through the entire meeting looking at it, just above my shoulder actually. A lot of folk thought it was childish, I actually thought it was rather important. I've been doing it for us for long enough. What's happened since then? The whole range of things. But in particular there's Brexit, a pandemic, and now a war in Europe. And whether we like it or not, the case for independence has to be changed to meet the change of circumstance. One of the only two English economists in history who was worth a damn, the great John Maynard Keynes, once said, when the facts change, I change my mind. And we're not going to change our minds about independence. But what we have to do is to make sure the new case for independence fits the modern world, fits the circumstances that have changed. So since I sat with David Cameron in the Edinburgh Agreement, what's changed? Well, in terms of the progression of the case for independence, it's hardly been progressed at all over the last 8 years. That's just the reality. It's not running folk down, it's just the truth. The strategy about getting independence hasn't changed particularly either until very recently, and I'm going to come to that in a few seconds. You see, the SNP was formed in 1932 at the amalgam of the National Party of Scotland and the Scottish Party. Owen wrote his first book about it, roughly about that time, Owen. Actually, Owen's first book, as a young academic at Edinburgh University, was a book called Celtic Nationalism. In it was Hugh McDermott talking about Scottish nationalism, and Gwyneth Evans talking about Welsh nationalism. If you never get a copy, it'll be well worth getting. And so it's really fantastic that you asked me, Owen, to write the foreword to his latest book, which in a way returns to that early theme, and I was honoured to do it. I also had to apologise to Owen actually, because when I was editing the Free Student Press, and I thought a young firebrand lecturer from Edinburgh University was exactly the person to write our star article for our latest edition, and when it didn't arrive, and I came to Edinburgh to find out why not, and he absolutely promised me on a Saturday morning it would be delivered to me by the Monday so that I could take it through a Hamilton press. He said, listen, I'm going down to see Hugh McDermott, bigger, this afternoon. Would you like to come? And I said, well, I've got a ticket to the Hibs Hearts game. See, it is the folly of youth. But you think a ticket, this was early, in the late 70s, that you should think too what were then, and in the case of Hibs still are, a very mediocre side. So I went to the 0-0 draw at Easter Road instead of beating Scotland's greatest 20th century poet, which I've somewhat revised my opinion on my choices. So the foreword to Owen's book is by way of an apology for my mistakes all these years ago. But the point about this isn't a mistake, that from 1932 right through until the late 90s, in the advent of the Scottish Parliament, the SNP had a means by which they thought Scotland could become independent. And that means there was 71 or 72 Scottish seats. You win 36 of them and you say, bingo, we're going to independence. And that was helped, of course, by the Unionist parties, every Prime Minister since Harold Wilson, conceding that if the SNP won an election, then of course they would play the game. Margaret Thatcher, the Downing Street years. Scotland is a proud nation. If the Scots were ever to determine on independence, then no English politicians, certainly not myself, would gainsay that process. The difficulty was that some of us had an unhealthy suspicion that that's what they said when they were confident the SNP wouldn't win the seats, and they would say something entirely different if it happened. It's a theory of history called perfidious Alba, which has worked rather well, because the English, great and noble people though they are, have had a peculiar incapacity of putting into power some of the people less fitted to wield that power in world history. Something that's happened from the Duke of Wellington to Anthony Blair. And if we look at the contenders for the Tory party leadership, you see that line of disaster is going to be totally unbroken. So we devised a strategy, myself and Jim Sillars and a few other people, by which if the SNP declared itself in the political spectrum, moved down a social democratic path, identified itself honestly to the Scottish people, won a devolved parliament, then we could use the vehicle of the devolved parliament in order to exercise the sovereignty of the Scottish people, and that would give us a platform by which we could face down Westminster. Hence the importance of the Edinburgh Agreement. But back in 2012, when we signed that document, people kind of wondered, why does Cameron sign the document? Now, partly, of course, it was because Cameron and George Osborne, who did his thinking for him, used to believe they could see off independence as long as it was a single question. So I helpfully devised a tactic by which I persuaded them that what I was really about was getting them to turn us down the referendum and running our own referendum with 3 questions. I can tell this audience exclusively, I had absolutely no intention of doing that, the 3 questions back, but it was politic and useful to make them believe it. Because when you're in a struggle for power, you have to work out what your opponent likes least. And the thought that we would win a referendum and gain additional power was the thing that they were most terrified with, and the second thing they were most terrified about was we'd take it upon ourselves to claim the sovereignty of organising our own referendum. And having established that process of the Section 30, virtually, and made to look like an international agreement quite deliberately by myself, that's why it's called the Edinburgh Agreement, it is a little bit disappointing for us to have moved back to the position that what we do is we write a letter which doesn't even demand a Section 30, but sort of mentions it, and then says if Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss says no, as they inevitably will, we sort of move on to another tactic even before we try to face them down on that first question. Having achieved the route, the mechanism, the way to give Scotland that choice in its future, the idea we should just let that go, it sounds to me quite incredible. If Daniel O'Connell, the Liberator, could face down the Duke of Wellington and persuade him on the merits of Catholic emancipation, so much so that he was prepared to fight a duel to do it, then do we really think that Scotland can't turn over by peaceful demonstration, by parliamentary action, Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak? I apologise to Mr. He's got a lot of problems to do, but that's no one. Do we really think we can't face down a couple of the most mediocre candidates ever to emerge from a Tory leadership contest? And that is saying something. So, what I would argue is that before we get on to plan B or C, which I'm about to come to, why don't we deal with plan A? And how to do it, in my estimation, is to do 45 times over what Kenny McCaskill and Neil Hanby were doing in Parliament just 3 or 4 weeks ago. Backed up by mobilisation of people, which hopefully Alba will be doing on the 18th September, to make the point that the parliamentarians are working in concert with the people, not in advance of them and not behind them. And by diplomatic action, to persuade other countries of the justice of our non-violent, peaceful, constitutional demand of the right of self-determination. The plan B, we're told, is to go to the UK Supreme Court. And I've got to be honest with you, I think that is extraordinary. UK Supreme Court will adopt a position that the Scottish Parliament is a creature not of the people, which it is in a referendum, which it was, but a creature of Westminster statute. And they shall look at the Westminster statute, and after humming and hawing and listening politely to the Lord Advocate arguing, as far as I can see, against the case of our own government, and then they'll come to a conclusion. I'm afraid that the pursuit of independence lies out with our competence. Our competence as the Supreme Court is to tell you what that legislation means, and it isn't what you want it to mean. That's what will happen. Now, of course, I was reading just the other day that apparently this is all a subtle plan to so enrage the people. Well, I think the people are going to be pretty raging this autumn. And they won't be raging about what the Supreme Court says. They'll be raging about their electricity bill and their fuel bills and the fact they can't afford to stay in Scotland. They can't afford the cost of living rises. And as Kenny McCaskill was pointing out in the last 2 days, that a country which can produce 10 times its electricity needs at half the cost that it's currently being produced is actually going to introduce mass fuel poverty in a land of energy plenty. That's what they'll be raging about, and what they'll be looking for is a political party which can encapsulate that rage, give it form and substance, and take it forward to solutions. The Supreme Court, in my estimation, is a fool's errand. The legal case for Scottish independence doesn't rest on UK domestic law, it rests on international law. It rests on the Helsinki Agreement, the United Nations Charter, what the UK itself has said about other cases such as Kosovo. That's where it rests. And the claim of right doesn't rest on the Declaration of Arbroath for 1689 or even the 1980s. That's a passage of sovereignty at the heart of the Scottish constitutional tradition. Where that claim and responsibility rests right now isn't in the Supreme Court in London, it's in the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh, or the parliamentarians from Scotland. And if you want to exercise it to make the appeal to international jurisdiction, which you should, if you can't face down Westminster in a Section 30, then you call on these people, elected by the Scottish people, to exercise that sovereignty by getting off their backsides, forming a convention and demanding the legitimacy that a majority of MSPs and MPs have. My last point is this. If the successive mandates, which are already there, somehow isn't seen to be enough, and we need a plebiscite election, which incidentally won't solve any of the problems, because I've got news for anybody who thinks it will. It won't be recognised by the other side as such. It won't be recognised by Westminster as such, but if such a plebiscite election is necessary, then for goodness sake, fight it not as a normal election with party interplay, fight it as Scotland United on the single issue of Scottish sovereignty and Scottish independence. Because if you try to fight it as an election in the normal fashion, then you'll end up not talking about Scottish independence and sovereignty, you'll end up talking about ferries or the health service or the education system or 100 things I can think that if I were an SNP and Green politician, I wouldn't be absolutely confident of the platform on which I was standing. So if it's to be a plebiscite election, and it could work under certain circumstances, but why on earth you'd suddenly dream up the notion that you need a majority of votes as well as seats, setting a bar so high, no other national movement in history has done this, But if that's what it's to be, then let it be. But let it be as Scotland United, to convince the people that the national movement can see the issue for such it is of such overwhelming importance that it requires a subordination of party political politics and division. So they would be my thoughts. And for all the Edinburgh Festival aspects and debates, which are great, for all the books that have been written, which are fabulous, for all the online discussion, the hope I've got is this: that having trod down a path towards freedom in 2014, having seen the results of not grasping that opportunity with both hands. I mean, 2 days after the referendum, people asked me, would folk in Scotland be angry? I said, well, a lot of people will be, a lot of people will be disappointed. But the folk will be really angry in a year's time. And not the people who voted yes, but the people who voted no and were sold a pup. And every single thing just about which the no side threatened, it's either happened, like Brexit, or about to happen, like runaway inflation and a cost of living crisis. So let's prepare and recognise that a huge amount has been done in terms of the conscience of the Scottish people, that the only thing that really matters in this debate is the determination and belief of people in their nationality, their nationhood and their self-respect. And that the job of political leadership, from wherever it comes, is to provide a realistic vehicle by which that can be expressed. In other words, not to follow the people to nowhere, but to lead them to independence to our country.